And
Oh,
so
you
Ken,
didn't tell me you were going to do that.
well,
Yeah, you
sorry
did. Yeah, you
about that.
did.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
I
Yeah, you
promise
did.
to use it for good and not evil.
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
We're fine.
all right, I think we got everybody back on board with this here. I am pleased to introduce you to Ken Bevis with the Washington Department of Natural Resources, wildlife habitat biologist. I've known Ken for quite a few years, and he works almost exclusively with small private woodland owners all over Washington State. One of my most envious jobs. I think when I grow up, I'm going to try to push Ken out of the way and take his job. Uh,
3 years, babe.
Currently,
3 years.
3 years. Excellent. All right. That gives me a trajectory to aim for. So yeah, I asked Ken to come and share with us his insights into managing forests to improve wildlife habitat. And one of the things I've always appreciated about Ken's perspective on things is that he is just super practical. So for small woodland owners, it's kind of a cut to the chase. What are the relatively hands-on, easy ways that you can manipulate forest composition, bring in other structural components to enhance wildlife habitat. And so I'm really hoping everybody can pay close attention to his presentation, because I know for a lot of you, improving habitat opportunities out at Evergreen is one of your priorities. So Ken is going to give you everything you need to know. So take notes furiously. And
I'm laughing because my talk ain't misses that mark substantially.
oh shoot, maybe we should have
No,
coordinated a
it'll
little
be
bit
okay. It'll be
beforehand.
okay.
Anyway, I invited Ken to come here and talk about whatever he wants to talk about, because no matter what, it's always entertaining. So, Ken, with that, you can introduce yourself and take us down whatever
Okay.
rabbit hole you feel is inappropriate.
No, I'm teasing you, Kurt. I think I'm close to on target here because I was thinking about what we had talked about, and so to my understanding is the class is basic forestry for people in the biological majors who may or may not work in the profession someday, but have an aspiration to do so largely. Correct? Okay,
Boy, you just articulated the character of my class better than I could have. I think that's
nice.
about right.
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay,
I
good.
have
Yeah,
a
and
biological background here.
I'm sorry.
I don't have a biology background.
Well, excellent,
So flat beginning.
but you know about forests and you've been outdoors a lot and you have a sense of ecology and the notion that humans impact it.
Yes, just no words or vocab for it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, you're great. Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. No, I think I've got something that'll be useful here that shotguns a little bit, but I even inserted a part about career paths. So Kirk, that was a bit of a stretch on my part, but quite honestly, I pulled it from a different talk and I thought it might be useful. So should I share screen now?
Yeah,
Oh,
let's
oh,
see.
you got me all set up.
Yep, you should be able to do it.
All right, here we go. All right, so let's I'll throw my my little slideshow out here. See, there we go. Okay, and I can still see people on the side. You can dump me if you want. So yeah, I work for the Department of Natural Resources. This is by way of a commercial right here at the front, and I'm the stewardship wildlife biologist for small forest landowners across the whole state. And Kirk's correct. I have this totally cool job. There's only one of me. Um, but small forest landowners, that's a little bit of a cluttered slide, but there's 22 million acres of forest in Washington. And small forest landowners own about half of the private forests. I don't, and it's in this dark green. And you start looking at the areas where it is and say, let's see, Kirk is down here, and there's a lot of these parcels. And I'll bet you somebody in this class, either their family owns forest land or they own forest land, or they know somebody does. Uncle Ken's got 80 acres up by Packwood, whatever. And this is a lot of land. And basically, how do you address good land management on that much land? Well, you create this group that addresses these people with 5,000 to 5,000 acres. This is a little bit repetitive, but there's somewhere between 215 and 250,000 of these landowners, and we've got a small group that essentially does educational work and site visits and things to help them figure out how to manage their 3.27 million acres. So that's what I do. This is me right here. And I'm actually on a work trip with this fellow, Matt Preventure, right now. And this is Patrick Schultz, who works for WSU down in Southwest Washington. And we will deliver educational classes, do site visits, uh, consultations. We kind of do what Kirk does, but we're free. So Kirk, I've had people say to me, like, you know what I really like about you? And I'm thinking they're going to say, oh, you know so much about birds. It's like, no. I say, what? And they go, you're free. And but the bad news is we can't actually do true thorough work. Like Kirk could come to your place, literally do a stand exam, tell you how many trees per acre, make a solid recommendation of what to do, whether or not it'll pay for itself. We don't do that. We go like, oh, that stand needs to be thin. And by the way, you've got pileated woodpeckers. See ya. Maybe you should call Kirk Hansen. So anyway, that's kind of how we do it. And Kirk, the conversation Kirk and I were just having was that he used to work in the group that I'm in right now. And so we were sort of almost reminiscing and bringing it up to date. So anyway, that's what I do right there. And so a big part of my job is to share with people forest and wildlife habitats and how you interact with the forest and what do you get out of that in regard to wildlife. And I've thought about this a lot because wildlife is an emergent property. If you remember this from your biology class, that wildlife is basically something that is a response to habitat conditions. We really don't manage in any meaningful sense very many species at all. And the ones that always come to mind are like deer and bear and cougars and that sort of thing. And yes, there are some direct management actions for many of those species, but mostly we don't. Most wildlife is just something that occurs or doesn't based upon what the habitat is like. So I'm going to speak a little bit to that. So let's just do a little overview of Washington, that the state is about 2/3 covered with forest. And Washington is the evergreen state for good reasons. This middle part, a lot of it's agriculture now, but it's shrub steppe or grassland. And roughly, oh, you are here about, is that about right? Kirk, did I get that about right? Somewhere down there, roughly south end of Puget Sound. Yeah, so Washington State's about 2/3 forested, and the forest varies a lot, and so do the species. So there's roughly 400 species of vertebrate wildlife in Washington's forest, and that's vertebrate wildlife, by the way. That doesn't count insects or mollusks like slugs and snails. But wildlife is often characterized as vertebrates, and that means things with a backbone. And they range all the way from like an Anna's hummingbird up to an elk. And so an Anna's hummingbird weighs like 3 grams, and an elk weighs, let's just say, 1,000 pounds. And how many grams is 1,000 pounds? It's a lot. It's a lot. So the variability is tremendous. And so, we have amphibians like the western toad, reptiles like the rubber boa, birds like the barred owl, and mammals like bears and bats and elk. And so the variety is really pretty remarkable. We've got a very, very interesting, diverse set of wildlife. So these forests, you can divide them into two crude categories, and I just like to say wet and dry. In the wet forest being essentially west of the Cascade Crest, where the most of the moisture comes from the southwest, kind of in this pattern. And let's see, I'm up here now, which is a little bit of a rain shadow, which is kind of interesting. But there's basically the wetter forest and the drier forest, and they have similar characteristics. So in Eastern Washington, who's been to Eastern Washington? Probably most everybody at some point in time. Oh, by the way, Kirk, can we do the chat box if people have a question or something? Okay, thumbs up here. So everybody change your chat settings. Oh yeah, just everybody. Yeah, just say everyone, make sure. Oh, there you go. Thomas, you rock. 45,000 grams. Thank you. Yeah. So if you got a comment or something, pop it in the chat box and I'll look at that every now and then. Or Kirk can say something. Well, I'll set it off to the side here. Can you guys see me moving that around? No, okay, that's just to me. Okay, so here we go. So the Eastern Washington dry forest tend to have a similar characteristic to the west side, meaning it's dominated by conifer, but there'll be a lot less of an understory. So you'll have the scattered overstory trees with less understory, but it's still a conifer forest with that, upper canopy, a shrub layer. And anyway, and on the Western Washington, we have these wet forests that will have more layers, and the species mix will be different. I meant to say here, it'll be ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, grand fir, with blue elderberry, wild rose sort of things in the understory. In Western Washington, the species mix changes where you'll have, let's see, did I say that in there? I gotta turn this thing, minimize it. So you might have cedar, hemlock, Douglas fir, red alder, a different mix, but let's just call them a wet forest, meaning they're messic. They're like, you think Western Washington forest, and you usually are thinking of green layered, often drippy, thick salal. Do I sound kind of like I'm going like, oh my God, that's Kirk, this is your world. It's this amazing, lush place in Western Washington. And that's the natural forest that we see a lot of. Yeah, here we go. There's a picture. So there's your species mix, and it's deeper, it's greener, it's got more of an understory. Well, oh, and Douglas fir being a dominant species in both of these forest types. And something about Douglas fir, and we witnessed this today, is that as one of the overstory trees, and it's always subject to the stand dynamic, is these things can live a really long time. So you can have Douglas fir trees that can be, 100, 200, 300, 400, and rarely 500, 600 years old. And that is a remarkable lifespan for any organism of any kind. And even the hemlocks will live, what, 250 years, Kirk? I can see you, so you can nod and give me a little thumbs up on things. Yeah, and the alders will live 120 years, which is quite a long time anyway. But that stand dynamic of how everything is changing is a really important characteristic of these forests. And so in Western Washington, that's something to remember. The canopies will often be dense with trees growing into each other and layered under each other, and then down below that there'll be down logs and salal and sword fern. So in Western Washington, it's a pretty darn dense forest. And these natural forests will be very uneven. I think this is a really interesting characteristic, that they're not a monolithic, green umbrella above you, but the natural forest will have these places where root rot or something killed a bunch of trees and they fell. And so you well, we'll see this in a second, go to an old growth forest. It'll be this really uneven, gappy canopy. And it has to do with these trees living, dying, et cetera, with all these different species mixed in there. So the eastern forest is the same in different ways. And so essentially a really interesting characteristic, and I didn't hammer this right here.
Ken, you froze up on us. That's the problem with communications in the San Juans. It's like a third world country up there.
So tasering deer, huh?
Well, or pit traps, one or the other. Either way, it's got to be dramatic. So,
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Hey, Timothy. Hi, Thomas. How you guys doing? Everybody awake? Everybody's good? Omar, can't see you, but that's all right. Hi.
Welcome back.
uh-oh.
Kirk, sometimes when other professors have connection issues, they turn off their video. And that helps.
Oh.
But
Well,
it's great to see him.
Me, but I'll be able to do, that's a good call. Okay. You can't see me anymore, but now, thank you for that tip. My internet, okay, Kirk, you got to let me back in as a screen sharing guy.
Sure, right. Hold on a second.
Okay, no, that's a good call there. Okay. All right. Are we getting used to this Zoom thing, by the way?
No, everybody hates it.
not remotely.
We want to meet in person.
It is better in person. It's true. I mean, because, you know, have you done it enough where you kind of forget and you start to like scratch your nose? I mean, how many times have you, yeah, you picked your nose or something and you go, oh, geez, or burped. I burped on one the other day. How embarrassing. All right, here we go. All right. I'm just gonna pretend like nothing happened, if that's okay. Okay. So I'm assuming that everybody here has some background in forestry and such, and they know about succession, you know, forest changing with time. Not if you've heard that, Thomas, right? You're good. You're good with succession. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
Elizabeth. Yeah. And that these
We
habitats
talked
change.
about that, and
Okay, good. That they change with time. Well, remember that comment about wildlife being a emergent property, you know, so there's a alder stand that was cut 7 years ahead with a big leaf maple sprouting back. There's a 105-year-old mixed stand on Miller Sylvania Park, and there's some old growth in Mount Rainier Park, all still a conifer based forest, but they changed with time. And so, you know, we're back to this Western Washington wet forest, you know, with the cedar trees and the creeks and everything, and the multi-layered and all of this. And we have a lot of what's the word? Recovering forest from land use history in the early part of the century. And so it's important to remember that the western part of Washington was covered mostly in an old, rich forest. There was a lot of really well-developed timber, if you want to call it that, all across Western Washington. And these were stands with these dominant overstory trees, you know, a rich understory, lots of mid-level trees, stuff that looked like this. And this is from the Quinault rainforest. Have you ever been over to Lake Quinault? You've been there, Kirk? You've been there, right? Yeah. And on the north side of, no, excuse me, south side of Lake Quinault, there's a patch of forest that some wise person back in the early part of the 20th century decided to set it aside as a research area. And now there's this cool little nature trail up through there. And you've probably been there. It's like a little trailhead, you know, and it's easy to walk. But that stand has got, these pictures are from there. It's got this remarkable layering and everything. And it's just what most of Western Washington used to look like. Well, as you learn about forests, you start to look at stand structure. And so these trees are, oh gosh, like 190 to 220 feet tall, which is enormously tall for trees. This tree right here is over 100 feet tall, and it's an understory tree. Hemlock, Douglas fir, down logs, you know, all of this amazing structure. And I said this earlier, but some of those trees are really big and they've been there for a long time. So this is a very stable environment. This habitat is something that species could live in, you know, for a long time. And they would change, you know, every 600 years when there was a forest fire, et cetera, et cetera. But on a landscape scale, there was lots of this stuff. And the species, those 400 species that I mentioned earlier, most of them emerged from this environment and they're still here. That's what's so interesting, is they're still here in the Pacific Northwest. We have essentially an intact fauna. And that's not true in a lot of the world. There's many, many parts of the world where the habitats have been so dramatically changed from whatever the quote natural was, that those species are either completely modified or gone, or, you know, significantly diminished. And so one of the miracles of the Pacific Northwest is the fact that this environment is not that different from what it was historically. However, this is what happened, and this is an important historical tidbit, that in the late 1800s, when civilization, if you want to call it that, when industrial civilization arrived, what did we have that made a big difference in the way that that forest that I just described was exploited? It's in this picture. This is sort of a question.
Steam.
Bingo. Who said that?
Mark.
Nice. Nice job. Yes, we had steam power, and we showed up with these steam donkeys. And I'll bet you somebody in this class, like myself, has some old relative who used to work in the good old days of timber. And this is the crosscut saws and everything, and these big engines right here. And Kirk, I'll tell this for yourself and others, but well, this is one of those family things. This is my ex-wife, and her grandfather was an old-time logger, and his claim to fame that at one point in time for the Long Bell Timber Company, he was the operator of the world's largest steam donkey. So he was this guy right here who stood on this bloody thing that pulled these cables up and down the hill, and the guys are up there on the hill sawing down the trees with crosscut saws, and then they yank them down to the railroad, load them on the railroad. Well, they were really good. And this was an amazingly dangerous, hardcore thing. And they logged out the entire Puget Sound Trough, all the lowlands, like the whole thing by what, 1920, 1925, between 1880 and 1925, they pretty much logged the whole place. And they did it like this. And I love the safety gear on these guys. No gloves. That's hardly a hard hat, although they don't need ear protection. But look at these characters. And that's really hard work. And so right there, maybe you've talked about this, Kirk, but we saw this today. Right there is this. That's where they put the springboard. So they'd put this board into the side of the tree so they could cut it above the butt swell where the tree was not perfect. And you see these stumps out there in the landscape today a lot. And the cedar stumps in particular are still there. But basically the evidence of the harvest of the first forest. Let's see, let me do this, go back here this way. Look in the background here. Look at this hemlock, Douglas fir, mixed dense stand right here that's being cut in the foreground. This part's been yarded. The evidence of what happened here is all around us, particularly in Western Washington. And so that's a really interesting tidbit because it's been what, 100, 120 years, and those pieces of wood are still there to tell us, and those species are still there. Well, now when you go out in the forest, you're essentially looking at the stand that regrew from these previous activities, and you can generally tease it together of how many times there had been harvest or land use change or whatever. So this is Miller Sylvania Park. Do you know where that is? Over near Olympia. It's got a really beautiful forest that was logged off in, I think, the year 1895 or something like that. So that's a 125-year-old naturally regrown forest. And if you really start to look at it, it's got a lot of the characteristics of that old forest, but it's denser. You know what? I keep pointing at the screen as if you could see me pointing at it. So, yeah, but you can see my cursor, right? Can you see? Yeah, okay, just that. Okay, so there you go. Yeah, so every forest tells its story about how it got to where it is right now. Well, in Western Washington, we have lots of managed forest, and we have lots of stands that were cut once, cut twice, replanted into kind of a crop approach. And so intensive forest management, often in what's the word? Even age blocks, is kind of a crop forestry. So this stand right in front of you is a private holding, and this guy had planted these Douglas fir trees 25 years earlier in a clear cut after cutting a second growth forest. In the foreground, he had just recently harvested about an acre of it, and he wanted to grow cedar trees. So here's cedars in the foreground with a Vexar tube on the bottom of them so the deer wouldn't eat them, and they're tall enough that now he's got a little crop of cedar trees growing right here. Well, this is an intensively managed landscape right in front of you. And what's really interesting in forestry, and I'm going to do a editorial comment here that I think Kurt would concur with, and I'm putting thoughts in your brain there, partner, that forestry is really interesting because you essentially use natural elements arranged in some manner to accomplish a human objective, but natural processes basically run the show. You don't water things, you seldom fertilize, you stick it out there, you step back and go, all right, baby, I hope I get what I was aiming at here in 45 years. And so forestry takes a long time. Fundamentally, it takes too long. So it's really interesting and important to understand the native system, which is what I'm going to get at here, in order to help biodiversity persist. So there's lots of managed forests that are being manipulated for the primary objective of growing wood fiber. And so, commercial forestry has a significant bias that the goal is to grow a straight tree for harvest, which is, very laudable and useful. We all use wood for the this, that, and the other. And it works. You thin stands, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there you go. Yeah, and these even age stands, that strategy is very effective for growing trees quickly. Fair, Kirk? Yeah, and you do a little bit of thinning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you can get wood pretty quick, but you may or may not have all the biodiversity that we've associated with this. So this is a stand that was thinned, I think, pre-commercially before that in a tree farm. And a tree farm is a place that is managed primarily for the objective of growing wood fiber through manipulation of the species and the densities to get them to a harvestable size and spacing and everything as quick as possible generally. So there you go. That's a tree farm. But a lot of our small landowners, and I'm going to shift a little bit to what I see all the time, own these stands that are like these mixed stands that were not manipulated to the even age proportion. And so there's lots of places where there's big leaf maple, cottonwood, red alder, a little cedar in the understory. This little stand on the right's in the Skagit, and it has, let's see, there's grand fir, cedar, hemlock, cottonwood, red alder, all in that frame right there in this mixed stand that came in naturally. And then there's the remnant of the old harvest. There's the springboard stump in a plantation right on the edge of a natural stand of mixed stuff. And alder, pretty much most of the alder you see in Western Washington seeded in after a harvest that they did not replant. And you start thinking about this, that in order to do tree planting, and I digress for a moment here, but tree planting seems like this totally laudable thing to do. But where do you get seedlings for tree planting? You get them from a nursery. Where did the nursery get the seed? Oh, they gathered it somewhere. Is it native seed? Hopefully, but you're not necessarily replanting things from that place. So anyway, that's an interesting question. So these mixed stands of conifer, hardwood, et cetera, are all across Western Washington. We see a lot of it. And as you look at a forest, you've got to really consider the dynamics of the stand that you're looking at and how did it get to where it is and where do you want it to go. So I'm kind of talking like a forester here, but that reflects on the wildlife species that emerge from that stand. And so there you go. Yeah, so you got to think about stand dynamics the way you do this. I already said this. So in forest succession, there are very definite sets of species in the different stages. And you might have somebody say like, well, is forestry good for wildlife or bad? That's, you know what, that's actually not a legitimate question or comment because it's all different, that there's different species associated with different types of forests and different stages. So for example, you could lump the forest into early, mid, and late. And over here in the early stage, you would have a whole different species complex than you would over here in the late. So for example, in the early, you might have song sparrows and voles, and mid, you might have deer that go in between. They might bed down over here, but they don't really live over here. And let's go over here into the late Cyril, and we've got flying squirrels and barred owls and pine marten. They're different. And the number of species, interestingly, is about the same in this early and in this late. The lowest species diversity is in mid-closed canopy, but point being, they're all different. So here's a couple of examples. So in the early Cyril, any birders in the group, by the way? Any birders? Kirk, are there any birders in the group? Okay, good. Yeah, there you go. So think about where you go look for birds. Often it's in like brush. You go look in the brushy habitats where there's lots of shrubs and you might find rufous-sided towhees or song sparrows. Deer, everybody likes to talk about deer. We already did over here on the San Juans. That deer are really a species of earlier Cyril stages. What do they eat? They're browsers. They eat essentially shrubs and brush and grass. They don't eat conifer trees. They'll bed down under the conifer trees, but they're really more of an early and mid-Cyril species. And a totally interesting tidbit happening in Western Washington is some of your highest deer densities are in heavily settled areas, places where they're not subject to predation. The cougars are pushed back. Orcas Island, where there are no predators. You want to see the biggest blacktail buck I've ever seen was along the road in Anacortes, standing there by the road. And he was like this big old 5-point, like, and he lived there. Yeah, exactly. So deer are a early mid cereal species. Woodpeckers, sapsuckers, like the sapsucker here, and that's actually yeah, that's a red-naped sapsucker, living in mid to, I don't know about late, but they got to have bigger trees. The barred owl, who's seen a barred owl? I always like to ask about who's seen one. Probably everybody has seen one. Yeah. Do you have them on your place, Kirk? You probably do. I'm going to say a little bit more about barred owls. They live in a dense conifer forest. They got to have some kind of a canopy. They're not really an early cereal species, but they will use early cereal habitats. There you go. Barred owls. Yeah. Oh, this is kind of interesting. Was eating a garter snake. I actually saw it catch a garter snake and start to eat it while it was still alive. It's kind of cool. So they're barred owls as a mid-cereal species. Pileated woodpecker. Who's seen a pileated woodpecker? Hopefully everybody raises their hand. About the size of a crow, largest woodpecker in North America. There you go. Thanks, Thomas. And they feed on wood-boring insects and carpenter ants deep in dead and decaying woods. And they're a keystone species because they will make cavities that other species use. But they're a mid to late cereal species. They can live in younger forests, but they must have elements of the late forest. Flying squirrels, there's one, that's the late forest obligate, pretty amazing little creature that occurs in more places than we know, but they cannot persist in heavily short rotation landscapes because they don't have any cavities. They got to go inside of something. They eat mushrooms. A really remarkable animal. And if we were live, I'd ask how many people had ever seen one. But let me look at the chat. Who's ever seen a flying squirrel? Where am I? There's my chat, baby. There we go. Depends on your target species. What did I say, Thomas? I don't remember. Anybody seen a flying squirrel? You have. Savannah, where did you see one? Yeah, because most people have never seen one. They'll either see it inside, like inside of a cabin or a shed.
Yeah, I
or
saw it in my partner's cabin.
There you go.
My cat
Cool.
brought it in. It was kind of sad.
Okay. Nice. I asked.
A friend of mine had a flying squirrel as a pet, as a yeah, that was a what do they call those? The medical pet or whatever.
Yeah. Did it sit on his shoulder and like would it ride around in his pocket?
Yeah, it was a service animal, and it was prescribed to him somehow, and it would live inside of his jacket. It would just crawl all through his sleeves and everything.
Oh, cool. Nice. I gave a habitat class to a bunch of loggers, the Contract Loggers Association, and I asked the question, how many of you ever seen a flying squirrel? And think about this as a group of timber harvesters, and it's like 3/4 of them raised their hand and said yes. And then I said, how many of you saw a flying squirrel in association with cutting down a tree? It was 2/3 of those guys. And so they live in cavities and, clumps in trees. And when they cut the tree down, the flying squirrel jumped out. So anyway, this is a species of late cereal that does occur if they have enough canopy complexity to persist. Yeah, it's a really cool animal. It's a totally amazing animal. Bears, everybody likes to think about black bears. Well, black bears can live in almost any landscape with adequate shrub and understory vegetation, as long as they're not persecuted or they don't get in trouble with people. I mean, once they get some size to them, because we don't have grizzly bears on the landscape, they really don't have any predators besides people. So their populations will get to the point where they essentially will tolerate each other. And I mean, I bet you everybody in this group has seen a black bear at some point in time. So they're across the landscape. They're not tied to a cereal stage. They'll pretty much use whatever they can find, and a really interesting animal. So I like to put black bears out there because they're a generalist who are limited in many cases on the landscape by human tolerance of their presence, because they always, if they're in a neighborhood situation, they always get in trouble with garbage or chicken feed or bird feeders or something. And then people call the game warden. What does the game warden do? The game warden kills them. They don't even relocate them. They kill them. And so it's an interesting thing. So, okay. So that was just a little bit of a flyby of different species associated with different uh, sterile stages. And I want to remind us that forest management is essentially manipulating the vegetative component in some kind of a reflection of that successional trajectory. And oftentimes when we do uneven age management or thinning and stuff, we're kind of monkeying around right in the middle of that successional stage. And so, that's just by way of a conceptual thing to consider, because there's a lot of variation in the way we manage forest on the landscape. So circling back a little bit, that, think about all forest as being not just a monolithic habitat, that there are these complex habitats full of different niches, and you can generalize those niches into the canopy, meaning the leafy branches overhead, the stems themselves, meaning the live stems like that one, or dead stems. And I'm a big fan of dead trees. There's the understory, the brush layer. Brush, I don't really like that term because brush implies it's waste, but the understory is rich. And the ground, meaning down logs, and the soil itself. There's a lot of stuff that lives down underground in burrows, and there's a lot of things that live associated with down logs. So in these forests, and I'm just going to digress, and this is relative to the stem. So the stem itself is a really significant element of the forest. And I knew I didn't have a lot of time, so I had to get to this. So dead trees are just really essential to forest ecosystems. It's just the way that it works, that a dead tree is something that persists for a long time. I got asked, you might appreciate this, Kirk, that I do content for social media for my agency now. And I was just asked to write a Halloween article about dead trees, relating them to zombies. Right. So exactly. So when a tree dies, it doesn't go away. There it is. It's this like spooky skeleton thing. And I got to figure out a way to make that like a spooky story. So if anybody has an idea of, how I could weave that into an Edgar Allan Poe-ish thing, let me know, because I got to write it tomorrow. And this is the way stuff like that works. So these dead trees are essential to forest ecosystems. And dead trees last for a long time. We were looking at one today where the butt log of a big Douglas fir that had been cut like 80 years ago, the butt log was essentially intact, meaning it was 4 feet in diameter. The bark was still on it. It was a little bit broken down, but it was still there. So this dead wood persists for a long time. That's a really important point in the way that forests work. They fall on the ground. You look at an old log on the forest floor, and even in really wet habitats, it's been there for a long time. I think this is interesting that in this case right here, here's colt's foot growing out of the soil, and there's moss on the wood. So the wood itself is a different substrate for different organisms growing out of it. And then lots of creatures live down under the log and everything there. They continue to break down. And so wood breaks down slowly. It takes a long time, and it slowly breaks into the soil. And this is something we've become much more appreciative of in the past. Like when did Jerry Franklin start talking about the old forest? It was about 50 years ago, right? Let's just say 40, 50 years ago. Previous to that, we didn't really understand the ecology of dead wood in regard to how important it was to feeding the forest soil. So just appreciate that, and so, yeah, the log becomes soil and it feeds everything. The mushrooms coming up are often the product of rotting wood, much less the banana slug, which is eating the fungus that's growing on the rotting stuff that came from the dead tree, et cetera, et cetera. So there you go. So these dead wood features will be key habitats for a lot of species, circling back to wildlife. And this right here, look, there's a pileated woodpecker cavity in this larch tree. This is Eastern Washington. Here's a broken off grand fir with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 woodpecker cavities visible on this side of this stem, which is just totally pretty amazing. And so I'm a little bit obsessed with woodpeckers. So I'm going to speak to primary cavity excavators. So the cavity excavators are keystone species because as a regular part of their nesting and courtship behavior, they do, oh, I went the wrong way. They do that. They make a new cavity or clean one out, hollow down in the tree. It's a great place to raise their young, et cetera, et cetera. And there's about 14 species in Washington, including hairy woodpeckers, sapsuckers, downy, or that's a downy, sorry, hairy, blackback, three-toed, pileated. I mentioned pileated being the biggest, and pileateds make these oval-shaped holes like this and make enormous cavities in the trees. So these woodpeckers will have a role in the forest where they can create cover, food, water, cover being the three needs of wildlife, out of a dead tree. And so that's what makes them a keystone species. These nest cavities. So next time you see a tree with a hole like that in it, really pause and think about what kind of tree it is and how long it might have been staying there dead. Often they have broken tops because they soften up. And this hole, like that hole right there, I think that's a hairy woodpecker. It's probably about 2.5 inches in diameter. Only was able to be constructed because that tree had stood there long enough to get soft enough for the woodpecker to dig it. That'd be a good song lyric, wouldn't it? Send me song with got a little rhythm to it. Yeah, there you go. And so when you see that little hole, here's what might be inside. See if I can, yeah, it'll be this concave concave cave. There's a little redundancy that goes down about, let's see, sorry, I did it again. It goes down about 4 to 5 times the depth of the hole. So this one goes down to probably here. And it's pretty consistent how deep they are. Well, this is a really good place to raise young. And you think about how vulnerable a bird is when it's sitting with babies or sitting on eggs, and a predator couldn't get at them very easily because there's only one entrance. And I like to point out that woodpeckers happen to have a chisel attached to their face. And if a chipmunk or a squirrel or a martin stuck its head in here and you were a woodpecker right here with a chisel on your face, there'd be a really good situation for defending yourself. So woodpeckers have a high fledging rate because of this nesting strategy. And I said this, but every year they either make a new one or clean one out, and they just have to do that. That's why woodpeckers don't use nest boxes, because they just gotta build it themselves. But then the following year, they go do it again somewhere else, and those cavities are abandoned. And all these other critters use these cavities. All these other critters go in there as secondary cavity species, including lots of birds like chickadees, wrens, nuthatches will go use abandoned woodpecker cavities. Oh yeah, so there's their names. Small owls. Who's ever seen like a saw-whet or a screech or a, let's see, saw-whet, screech. Oh, let's see. Yeah, there you go. Nikki says we should, nice. Add to the fact that other living organisms feed off the dead. Yes, there you go. Oh, thank you, Nikki. We're doing that right now. Yes, so other organisms live in those hollowed out cavities, including the small owls. And so pygmies, saw-whets, screech, will use those cavities big time. Owls don't make nest of any kind. No owl makes a nest. Mammals, there's my flying squirrel again. Douglas squirrels, I love these guys. They really like cavities and they will use abandoned woodpecker cavities. Bats are totally cool set of species. They need roost sites. They got to get inside of something. They love cavities. They love loose bark. They actually like sheds. Shake roofs are great bat habitat, but they will use abandoned woodpecker cavities. Thing tips over, here's the log laying on the ground. They're also a great habitat for a whole nother set of species that live in that ground-based ecosystem. So for example, oops, sorry, I did it again. Right down along, look at a down log sometime, and you'll see right along the edge of it will be what looks like a game trail. And it really is, and it's for the mice and the voles and other things to travel just under a little bit of cover to make it tougher for a hawk or an owl to get them. Inside of the interstitial spaces in the rotting log, there'll be salamanders, there'll be insects, there'll be centipedes, all kinds of stuff. So down logs provide a lot of habitat too. So an important fundamental point that this dead wood produces a habitat that a lot of species use. And it's about 38 to 40% of those forest vertebrate species are totally dependent on these wildlife trees, this dead wood. And the list is really long. So the reason I bring this up is because in our management, we manipulate stems a lot. What do we take when we do timber harvest? We take stems, and then the shrubs grow back, et cetera. And so it's something that I really like to remind people to be conscious of, so that we deliberately keep these dead wood structures on the landscape all the way through those successional effects of our management. And so it almost can't be understated. And so some people, like to talk about their religion, and I'm not supposed to, but I'm going to tell you what mine is I'm an evangelical snagist. That's right. Catch that? An evangelical snagist. We should keep smiling at that. Thomas likes that. Yeah, you got to believe in something, and I believe in dead trees. So anyway, so I just wanted to remind you that the Pacific Northwest landscape is more or less, let's stay right here. Yeah, is more or less intact biologically, despite heavy duty human influence. And by the way, that's sort of external to urban settings and everything that are a lot more, but I mean, there's still a lot of forest land here in the Pacific Northwest. And most of the species are still on the landscape, but forestry and the way that it's practiced can be really controversial. And I just find this a really interesting thing right now, given fire. And Kirk, I think you will appreciate this, and some others in the group will appreciate this, that everybody's an expert on what we should do about forest fires now. You start talking about forest fires, like, well, we need to rake the forest. We need to thin the forest. We need to make everybody live in the city. We need to, and they'll just have these really firm opinions. And then as the professionals, you kind of got to back up and say, well, okay, here's what we know. And it's just really interesting. So I want to share with you a little piece of personal experience, because when I moved to Washington in 1886, yes, that was the last century. Were you born yet, Kirk? Yeah, you were born. Yeah, I'm kidding. Yes. I got a job working with spotted owls, and I actually spent almost 15 years as a spotted owl biologist. And when you say spotted owls to people, if I say spotted owls, somebody tell me what you think of with spotted owls in regard to, their effect on people in the Northwest. I'm fishing here, so type something in there, somebody. Nobody's doing it. All right, I'll type it in. Controversial. Is that fair? Anger from private landowner. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, anger. Hate from industry. Love them or hate them. Good. That's good. Yes, they're the saviors of the environment, or they're taking away the job, taking timber jobs away. Exactly. All these things are true. I mean, actually, yes. And so what happened was, I'm going to give you a little summary here. The U.S. Forest Service, according to the National Forest Management Act, which is their foundational legislation, says specifically you cannot make a native species, you cannot extirpate, I don't want to say go extinct, you cannot extirpate a native species from national forest lands through the actions of the Forest Service. So that's in law. Well, these guys started to study this bird, the spotted owl, down in Oregon, Eric Forsman, and they put radios on and stuff. And they basically found out that this bird had to live in at least a mature forest, older forest, had to be an older forest with the snags and the structure and all that stuff. And the Forest Service at that time had active plans to convert much of the national forest essentially into a series of staged even-aged tree farms. They were doing an aggressive program of removing old forests, replanting in these little blocks. And the research was pretty solidly showing that if you did, this bird would no longer exist on the landscape. And so the data was really pretty solid. And so they crash landed into essentially a conflict of mandates. Boom. Well, my little personal piece of the story was I moved to the Pacific Northwest right when that was going on. And they hired people to go out and study spotted owls in the field. And I was one of those people. I used to go out and look for them. I actually handled at least 150 of them as a wildlife biologist, putting radios on and all that stuff. And you'd follow them around. You'd pretty much find out that they stayed in the older forest, which is the stuff that they were converting to younger forest and then harvesting. You know, round head, dark eyes, totally cool animal, real gentle. Had 2 or 3 babies per year. They hoot at you. They live. They communicate with each other by way of vocalizations. They don't have much of a smell. They have really good eyes for night, but a really interesting animal. And every time you followed them around, you pretty much found out that they stayed in this kind of habitat. They lived in these denser, complex forests, and they ate, when you picked up their pellets, they ate flying squirrels almost exclusively. So essentially, we documented that this animal was a habitat specialist in old forest, which were highly coveted, understandably, by timber industry and humans to make forest products out of. I mean, my God, these Douglas fir trees, those very ones we were talking about, are magnificent. Oh my gosh, if you want to talk about good wood, there they are. They're some of the most beautiful trees in the world. And here we had this conflict. Boom, we've got this species that the science guys are essentially saying, you know, use exclusively this habitat that we're coveting. That's everybody are coveting for products, and the law says you can't do that. Now what do you do? So they wrote a bunch of plans. They took areas on the landscape and said, okay, how many acres do you guys need? Okay, when we drew these big blobs on the map and said, okay, we're not going to log that. We'll go ahead and harvest over here. We'll go over here. Oh, and by the way, they exempted private land pretty much. So Weyerhaeuser could keep harvesting their ground, and the Forest Service is going to take the brunt of the biological preservation over there. And this stuff went down right at the end of the 20th century, and those plans are still in effect. 22 years later, there's big areas on the national forest where there's been no harvest for a long time for this very reason, that they essentially came to a biologically based compromise intending to give this indicator species a chance at persisting over time, which is a really interesting thing, because we were willing, we collectively, society, to take an economic hit in order to preserve the existence of a native species that was something that hardly anybody had ever seen. So it became this really esoteric debate of like, you know, I love nature, so therefore I love the spotted owl. Have you ever seen one? No, I haven't ever seen one. I want to work. So you know what? I'm fine with the owl disappearing. I need to go and work at the mill and harvest trees and all that. So that actually happened. And the societal stuff that our comments alluded to are like 20, how many years is that? 30 years later. And you think about ecology, 30 years really isn't very long. Okay, so that sits there right now. Then this happened. In the 1970s, this guy showed up, spotted out. Now, I'd like to point out, don't they look a lot alike? Round head, dark eyes. On the left is a barred owl that is a Strix carina. Is that right? Did I get that right? No, Strix varia, V-A-R-I-A. That's the genus species. On the right is a spotted owl. That's Strix occidentalis. They're closely related. In the 1970s, barred owls showed up in the Pacific Northwest, natural migrants from the eastern part of North America. They made their way across the plains in Canada, probably jumping patch of forest to patch of forest, either in river bottoms or towns even. And there's a really good record of how they migrated south from British Columbia into Washington. The first verified sighting of a barred owl in Washington was 1972 in the Blue Mountains of all places. And they're a more aggressive, wider diet version of a mid-size Strix owl. So the niche that they occupy in a forest overlaps very significantly that of a spotted owl. And they've done radio telemetry and all this stuff. So when barred owls move in, they kick spotted owls out. They even interbred for a while. They've quit interbreeding. And pretty much every single small forest landowner that I ever talked to has barred owls on their property. And they go, whoo, 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 whoo. And spotted owl goes, whoo, 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 whoo. And they're almost the same bird. So arguably, this bird has taken over the niche of this bird. Now, whether or not they run them into extinction remains to be seen. They're actually doing experiments right now where they're going into controlled territories and killing the barred owls to see if that will reduce the competition enough that the spotted owl will start to reproduce again. And it sort of worked. I don't know if you read about this, Kirk, but down in California, it kind of worked where the spotted owls started to breed and call to each other again. But we'll never keep it up. You know, this is like claiming you're going to get rid of all the Himalayan blackberries. It's like, no way. And so, I mean, it's a really interesting thing because despite all the conservation and habitat protection and everything, this dude showed up and as basically undid all that other stuff. So it's a terribly interesting situation, complicated by many factors, but you know, as a naturalist, just embrace the barred owl. I bet a lot of people in the room have seen them and they're a totally, totally cool bird. So there you go. So there's spotted owls. Yeah, there's the barred owl. There's a spotted owl. How about that? It's the only bird that ever made the front page of Time magazine. And so we still remember it and we still I'm not sure we're truly devoted to maintenance of biodiversity at a big scale, but we'll see. So anyway, so there's a spotted owl. Then throw this one in the mix, the marbled murrelet. And I won't say that much about it, but the marbled murrelet is a little seabird. They're about the size of a robin. And so if you ever ride in the Washington State ferries and you look out there and there'll be the murres, the guillemots, and every now and then you see this little teeny seabird, not a gull, but a little teeny, like a murrelet. Like a murre is about the size of a duck. These guys are about the size of a robin. Well, marbled murrelet, they have this remarkable life history that they nest on the branches of old trees. The branch has to be at least 7 inches in diameter, and they fly up to 50. I just think this is crazy. They fly up to 50 miles inland over the forest and then drop out of the sky to the branch covered with moss and nest on it, lay their eggs on it. And the male and the female take turns brooding the eggs. And you think about this, historically, when the landscape had lots and lots of, you know, old big trees near the coast, these things were abundant all the way from Big Sur up into southeast Alaska. And there's still quite a few of them around. They're not probably not as endangered as spotted owls, but they have this very specialized habitat requirement of these big trees. And so we've come up with these management recommendations, and I say we, I guess I'm even talking about the DNR, where there's certain requirements for murrelet habitat and arguments over whether the branches are big enough, et cetera, et cetera. An interesting tidbit with murrelets is they're really, really hard to find if they're using the habitat. I don't know if anybody in the group ever done murrelet surveys or know anybody who has. It's pretty darn crazy because you have to sit in the woods before dawn and hear them fly over the canopy and go. That's all you get. That's it. Did you ever do that, Kirk? Did you ever go do murrelet surveys? It's this totally specialized thing. And then you don't know where they went. All you can say is, yes, they were here, yes or no. So we have a current, it's not as gigantic as the spotted owl issue, but the murrelets, they actually have lines on the map of where places are intended to provide nesting habitat for murrelets. So there we are with another situation where forestry can be controversial because it can be perceived as being destructive, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, we all use wood products. You know, I'm sitting here with the computer on a wooden table, and it's really interesting. So people like Kirk, who work hard at trying to figure out ways to provide forest products and protect the environment, are a really important element of the future. You know, it's all about sustainability and figuring out these in-between things where we try to protect the environment, we try to harvest, we try to, you know, keep water quality, et cetera, et cetera. How do you do that? Well, guess what, gang? That's what you're in this for, because so much of our landscape has been subject to management of some kind, be it agriculture, be it a tree farm, you know, be it a timber harvest, whatever. And so as we do active management and we try I don't want to say have it all, but to have as many things as we can in active management of the forest. You can use some tools like thinning, like these stands that have come in much denser than they once upon a time were. You could actually remove some of the smaller diameter trees, say like here, to help the bigger trees grow and sort of mimic and encourage the development of those old forest characteristics. Like here's some cedar trees coming in under a Douglas fir overstory. This is on Fort Lewis, by the way. They do some really interesting forestry on Fort Lewis where they harvested this batch of trees, yet it still looks like a forest. And I would suspect that a flying squirrel or a barred owl or something could continue to persist in that landscape because we didn't take all of the trees, we took a proportion of them in a thoughtful manner so that we used a variable density, we used a variable density strategy to get there. And we don't, the small landowners do, but timber industry tends to use larger units. So, this is an example of a way that forestry can address trying to keep habitat on the landscape while providing product. And then you could do it with smaller patches. You could do units of 1 to 5 acres. You could leave areas that don't get a big machine going through them. I said variable density. You can actually create some of those standing dead trees by snipping them off or having a climber go up there. You can do things. You can have units like this one on the Wild Thyme Farm. Kirk, don't you work there? You work at Wild Thyme? Yeah. And they do these really cool, Kirk, I wouldn't be surprised if you laid this out right here with this little, edge here. Here's a leaf patch. There's another unit over here. This was planted in a mix of species. And so doing a diverse arrangement of stand ages on the landscape. And I would suspect that this forest right here, because of the way that they did this harvest, probably actually went up in the number of species present, but none disappeared. Nobody left that hillside because they did that harvest there, because they did all these things. They left the snag, they did the patches, it wasn't even age. Yeah, here we go. So if you are doing forestry, use your snipper machine and just make a few of them. So that's a really good strategy. That's just one of them there. Yeah, so when you're working in forest, it's really all about thinking where the stand is going from where you are today and what sort of species are going to respond to the habitat that you're providing. So I don't know. So I know that's kind of a shotgun blast, but that was just how exciting forestry work is because the impacts are long term. I mean, it really does. It takes a long time for forestry to come to fruition. And it's just this totally cool field. And it's not just true of forestry, but any of the natural resource fields have got this remarkable long vision. And I hope I'm right, that we're on the cusp of significant, societal efforts to come up with ways to maintain ecosystems while we get what we need. And forestry can be leaders in that. I really believe that. I think forestry can be the place that people look to. So like, look what they did with the soil. Look what they did with salmon. The forest and fish agreement that the state is implementing is a amazingly successful program because we're fixing fish passage, we're putting logs in streams, blah, blah, blah. And the salmon, they're not recovering robustly, but we're making some progress. So there you go. So however we manage the landscape, those best habitats will be diverse. So there you go. Okay. So that was kind of my shotgun blast about forest and habitats. And I just wanted to kind of close with this, that how many people in the group are thinking of working or already work in natural resources? Question mark. Some? Are there a bunch? Kurt? Hopefully. Yeah, Elizabeth says possibly. I'm up here at the chat here. Okay, definitely, says Jonathan. All right, good. At least I got one definitely. Is anybody working in natural resources now or have an internship? Oh, there you go. Good. Jonathan's got a volunteering at JBLM. Oh, good. You met Rich Kuykendall. Yeah. Okay, good, good, good. Want to. Good. Thomas wants to. Sweet. All right. I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts on how to do that. Good. I'm glad to see that. So here's what you need to do. There's a couple of key elements, and you're doing one of them right now, and that is you got to get some kind of a credential. You got to get some kind of a degree, a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, because then you can be considered for the job. And then once you get the job, by virtue of your training, then you're going to gain some more experience. This is a loop right here. And once you get in, then what's going to happen is everybody that you work for is going to talk to everybody that you want to work for, because it's not a very big universe. Kirk, agree with me here. I need a nod there. Everybody knows each other. And so if you, all you got to do 3 things. You got to be capable. You don't got to be a superstar. You just got to be capable. You got to be reliable, meaning you'll be there on time. You'll do whatever you have to do. And you have to be pleasant to work with. You cannot be a drama person. You cannot be the one that's just always causing trouble. Whatever. You don't have to be, the life of the party. But if you are competent, reliable, and easy to get along with, you will get the next job. And one job will lead to the next, and you're going to have this totally amazing career path where you worked over here, and then you went over here, and then, oh yeah, I used to be a such and such, and you start talking to other resource professionals. And if you never broke that chain by getting blackballed, by getting fired, by being a drunk or something, they're like, oh, Ken, man, he's such a screwball. And I can speak for myself. I've had a successful chain because I think I was competent, reliable, and easy to get along with, and people hire me. I get the next job. And so that networking thing is really, really important. And if you get to that point, it's just really rewarding. I mean, it's like I walked around today with my colleague. We toured a property here on Orcas Island, and he was showing us trees and what he wanted to do and everything. And I thought, you know what? I'm at work. I was at work. It was like, this is crazy cool. So just remember those things. You got to get your education. You got to get some experience, volunteering, great call, whoever was doing that. If you can get paid for it, that's even better. Work your network. Do not be shy. Do not be shy. And in the modern world of social media, I'm sure there's many people in this group who are way better at that than I, but it's totally true. And in the early phase of your career, be ready to move, be ready to go to California, to Alaska, to Oregon, to whatever, for the experience. Because if you think you're going to just be here, you might wind up having to leave the profession because the timing is wrong for the work. So there's lots of different ways to do it. But mine was kind of a fluke. Winding up with owls was interestingly my lucky break, and it was a total fluke, but that's the way that it worked out. And I want to leave this thought with you too, is like, you really should look at yourself and decide what kind of impact you want to have on the world and what you're willing to put up with relative to your own value set. And I don't say this lightly, but if you're a total pragmatist and you want to provide for people, then you might be really happy working for Weyerhaeuser. You might be delighted in laying out even age units. If you're a really, really devoted animal rights person, you might not like that. Or if you're really just ready to grind in, and you like administrative stuff, go work for the Forest Service. So just that sort of a thought, who would be a good fit for who you work for, because you might be able to set your own path. So I know I'm teaching a class tonight, and so this always comes up with this stuff be on the test. You're darn right it will, huh? And this is a picture from a logging camp back at the turn of the century. And I just like to point out 2 things. Can you imagine what that room smelled like? Yeah, these guys are in woolies, and look at these mustaches. Every single guy has got a big mustache except for these guys back here. What's up there? All right, anyway, so I think Kirk, you should make everybody grow a big mustache. There you go. And yeah, so good luck with the class and your profession. And and even if you don't wind up working in natural resources, through this this effort, oh, there you go. you're going to have a better sense of it, and you'll be able to be a more informed citizen, because as we know, oh God, there's so much stuff going on right now, and people with knowledge and awareness have a really important role in society, and and there's a lot of stuff going on, so it's a really exciting time to be in natural resources, and there's a lot of opportunity. Do not let anybody tell you there's not a lot of opportunity, because there is, and much of it is in restoration work. How are we going to get the rivers back? How are we going to get the forest back, et cetera, et cetera. There's my email, Ken Bevis, DNR WA if you got a question, or if I can help you, link you to somebody. I don't know. I've been in this thing for, let's see, 1982. I've been doing natural resources for 38 years in Washington since 86. And I've worked for a bunch of different groups, and I don't know, I do know a lot of people, and I might be able to help you find something. So, Kirk, how was that? How did I do on time? I think I'm
Yeah,
just
that's
right.
great. Spot on, Ken.
Sweet Obedo. Do you want to do a couple questions? You guys all
Yeah,
want to go have
absolutely.
another
No, the
glass of
floor
wine?
is open. While you've got the chance to talk to Ken directly, who has questions?
Do you want to do it on chat, or go ahead?
No, just people. You
Yeah,
can either
you
stick your hand up if you don't feel like you're getting called on, or just unmute and
shout
throw a
away.
question at Ken.
Hopefully that made sense. Sorry, it was a little bit of a shotgun. Kirk, I didn't quite adhere to what you asked me to do. I went a little broader, but hopefully that was at least a little bit thought provoking for somebody. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, somebody hit me with something here. I can see some faces.
Say, Ken, might I be up? Because one of the things that I've had a huge challenge for finding an opportunity in working in land management
Right.
is, it is my passion, but I've had a hard time figuring out where to apply and being able to figure out where I'm
Oh
qualified.
yeah. Yep. This Jonathan talking.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And I've had some because originally I got an undergraduate in an undergraduate in geoscience,
Okay.
and then I worked in tech doing like management for like 5 years almost. In that time, got a GIS cert, and then got here, and everything I looked at, I just assumed that I didn't qualify for. I assumed that folks were looking for more practical work backgrounds, which is why I started volunteering as much as I could at JBLM. But I mean, as someone in this program, with a lot of volunteer experience at this point and a lot of fieldwork experience, but no paid work experience, like, am I competitive at least?
Yeah. So so what would, okay, so if you applied to, let's say, the conservation district on a restoration crew, and they were going to go out and, plant trees along streams, what would preclude you from that? Meaning, do you need to make more money? Are you, not physically able to dig holes? Could you travel? I mean, you're probably more qualified for entry level stuff than you think, but your skill set, and you said GIS and administrative things, you probably could come in at a mid-level without doing the field work first. You would just have to find the right organization that needed your skill
Yeah,
set.
that's something that I was told. Actually, Kirk told me, I believe, at our last field outing, that like I could be applying for some of these mid-level positions that,
Right. Yeah.
since I started looking at all this, I just did not even remotely consider. I just thought that I
No,
wouldn't even looked at.
the mid-level positions do not have to have the expertise in the particular thing. So I'll give you this right now. My boss right now has never been to the field with a stewardship person. He does budgets, he goes to meetings, he represents us, but I'm not honestly convinced he knows, but he does care what we do. So he represents us. So, I don't know how old you are and where you would be in that trajectory, but essentially, and I can see this now, as your career develops, your early phase, you're often building your basic skill set. Then you either stay on as a technician or you move into administration. And if you're really savvy and you're in government, and which is, I understand the best, you wind up in policy, which is different. And so you might be underselling yourself. That's my suspicion. It sounds like, you might want to go ahead and take a stab at something. And so you either apply to the private sector, consulting firms, the public sector, DNR, Forest Service, and oh, and by the way, the time, I say this for the whole group, the time to hustle up experience for next field season is basically starting right now. They finish hiring in like January, February.
Oh my
And so Jonathan, you've probably done this. You've seen all the different job announcements, USA jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
So,
I went through some waves of looking around, and then I got kind of like intimidated, and again assumed that I wasn't qualified enough.
No, never assume that. No, never assume that.
Okay.
You'd be surprised what might stick. But build a good resume, description of yourself. And then here's a job tip. When you find a job that you're really interested in, find out who the supervisor is that would be hiring you and call them. Just cold call. Hi, I'm Ken Bevis, and I'm really interested in Kirk working on your tree planting crew and the forest restoration program. And I just want to let you know I'm a real good worker, and I look forward to it. And you're going to get my application real soon. Can I call you back? And Kirk will go, yeah, sure. And then it's pretty interesting. When they look at that stack of applications, they go, oh, that's Jonathan. I remember that guy. He called me. So, and once you get the break, that's a really important thing. Once you get the break somewhere, it's going to lead to the next one. Yeah. I don't know if that was helpful, Jonathan, but don't give up. Be aggressive about it. Yeah.
What else do folks have for Ken? Any wildlife specific questions?
Yeah, anybody see a bear today? So here's one on Orcas Island. There are so many deer that the understory looks like it's been run by goats. The herbivory effects on plant diversity are enormous, and they can't really come up with a way to deal with it. It's really interesting. So just a case in point. Yeah, nice.
Hey, I had a question.
Go ahead. Timothy,
you were talking about the barred owls kind of out competing the northern spotted owls.
Yeah.
Are there other species that the barred owls that you're aware of that have had an effect?
That is actually a really good question. I don't know, because the barred owls have such a broad food base, like that one eating a garter snake. Spotted owls would eat a garter snake. I don't know if that's been addressed. That's actually an excellent question. Is like, what else? I mean, if these things are so aggressive and they eat everything, what do they do to the chipmunks, for example? And frankly, it's probably the kind of thing that it's just an effect that we couldn't do anything about. It would be beyond management. It's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. I actually honestly don't know.
Okay, yeah, I've heard a lot of like birders that I've talked to have a lot of concern about like some of the smaller owl species as well, like the
that the barred owls
owl
would kill them. Yeah, the barred owls would kill them and eat them.
Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Okay, but not something that you've come across in your
no. You know what, I should probably Google that. It would be a great Google. Let me know if you find something. Yeah.
All right, will do. Thanks.
Well, sometimes those kind of questions too are hard to study in a definitive manner, and even the barred owl, spotted owl, what's the word? Dislocation is pretty well documented, but it took quite a while to really say, you know what, these guys kicked those guys out. So yeah. Oh no, part of the coolest thing about studying wildlife and natural history is you're never done. Your whole life and your career, you're learning new things, which is something I really like about it. And you get to be outside for work. Yeah. Nice. I don't know. Hopefully this has been fun. Everybody, Savannah's still awake. I see you over there. Kind of. That Zoom is so weird. How fun.
I just really appreciated your presentation, Ken, and the little tidbit you threw in there about career stuff. I'm kind of in the same boat as Jonathan, but I might even be less behind on the path, but the last 6 years I've been doing dog training and childcare, basically like working with school age childcare, and I was a director of a summer school program for 3 years. But every chance I got, I was teaching those kids everything I know about the ecosystem and recycling and plants and animals and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a thirst of mine, and I don't know.
Go.
Go ahead.
No, you go. I was echoing you.
Well,
Nice.
It's a thirst of mine to share knowledge that I've obtained through the 8 years of undergraduate school that I went through, and I don't know. I don't know where my path is going to lead me, but taking this class has definitely opened my eyes to how much things I care about really align with ecoforestry and forest management. Because at first I thought I was going to be, forest ranger and do wildlife, research or something. But realistically, the wildlife depend on the forest, like you were saying. When you do forest management stuff, you don't really know what you're going to be protecting or what you're going to be helping or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. It all connects back to the forest.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you have a passion for communication, and so pursue that. I think there is a need for people to share what we collectively in this group know and are learning with society at large. I think Kirk would concur here that and it surprises me, because if you're a technical person, a scientist, this is the flaw of scientists. They really understand some particular thing, and most of them can't explain it to somebody else. And so that's why you have PR people. That's why you have people who are experts at communicating a message. And so part of our job is going to be to understand how this stuff works and then explain it to somebody else. So you may have a gift for that could be a way to, pursue your passion and do something that means a lot to you, which is related to that comment about what sort of impact do you want to have on the world. It's almost like, what can if you want to have a really successful career, I believe this now, and I bet you everybody in this room has seen this. You want to do something that you think is important and that you think is meaningful. And when you finish the day, you don't want to be like, oh God, I'm so glad to be done with work. You want to be like going, all right, how do I do it? I'm going to do that again tomorrow. Let's go. And if you do that long enough, you'll actually be very satisfied with how your work went, which obviously is it's not your whole life, but it's a big part of your life, whether you like it or not. And so I don't know, that's something I've come to really appreciate and believe about natural resources. And so, no, I don't think it's ever too late. I honestly don't think it's ever too late. I've met quite a few people who've come into the field in their 30s and 40s and who managed to find a cool niche. The downside is you won't, yeah, there you go. You won't necessarily make a lot of money right at first. So if you're limited by you got to get a certain amount of coin, or I can only live in a certain place, you've got a couple of challenges to overcome. But there's a lot of positions out there. You just got to find them. That's no kidding. Yep. So yeah, I don't know. It's, fight fires, plant trees, salmon restoration. And there's a whole bunch of groups that are doing active projects to plant bushes and trees along the streams, put the logs, and they'll hire people as technicians. And often they don't even have to have the specific degree. They'll hire somebody who is, who's just avid and willing. So yeah. Don't give up at all. I just let Carson in. Who's Carson? Am I allowed to do that?
I guess so.
Oh, Thomas, yeah, thank you. No, that's amusing there. So, and everybody here is working on a 4-year degree. Is that right? Getting some more credits, working towards a degree from Evergreen. Yeah, that's good.
Master's program. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Nice. Oh, yeah. Well, I think I've kind of burned up more time than I was supposed to.
No, you're right on the dot there, Ken. 9:30. Really appreciate you taking your evening with us. And
yeah. Anything out of Patrick or David or Alyssa or Savannah? Any tidbits? Nice. Thanks, David. Nice. Yeah, Zoom's a weird world, but we're kind of getting used to it, aren't we? Omar, are you a musician? What do you got in the background there? Cellos?
I'm a mariachi player.
Are you really? Cool.
No, I'm
Nice.
not. I'm making that up. I'm a liar. No. Yeah, I collect instruments.
Nice. Okay. I play guitar and I met a luthier yesterday who collects wood. So there we go. Yeah. Cool. Sorry, Kirk. I was just giving everybody one more chance there.
You bet. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, obviously I enjoy talking and I like what I do. And so I appreciate the chance. And I don't know if you know this, but Kirk Hansen is a superstar in his world. And so he's a leader in ecoforestry, applied landscape, helping people do a good job. And so Kirk, I want to say to you, I really admire your work and what you've done. And I'm enjoy being colleagues with you. Yay.
Likewise, always a spectacle and edifying. So thanks, Ken.
I don't know if you guys are allowed, but I'm going to do a house concert for the combined fund drive for DNR next Friday. I'll send you the link, Kirk. I don't know if you guys can sign up from outside, but it's like a charity thing. Cool. Nice.
Right on. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you've got your CDs available for sale online, but I should, if you do, I should send that link to folks too. That's.
I got a
great
website.
treat.
I've got a website, kenbevis.com. You can hear my songs. You can hear my songs on there.
Awesome.
It's true. Cool.
All right. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it.
Yay. Well, thank you, everybody. All right. Good night and good luck with the rest of the class. Thanks, Elizabeth and Savannah and David, Patrick, Kurt. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good
Thanks.
night.
Good
Thanks,
fun.
Ken.
Bye-bye.